Welcome everybody to our most recent session on reaching out while locked in. Tonight we have the distinct pleasure of hosting Dr. Justin Rhinehart. Dr. Rhinehart actually has some Kentucky ties. He got his master's here with some jackleg. I don't remember who it was, but somehow he got through that. Went to West Virginia, got his PhD with one of the best reproductive physiologists in history. Justin then got a job down in Mississippi State. Was there 3 years?
Right. Yep. 3 years.
3 to 4 years. Then moved back to his native state, Tennessee, and is the beef extension specialist with a specialty in reproduction there. And tonight he's going to talk about the long game in reproduction. It is an incredible privilege for us to have him. He's the best at what we do, and it's going to be a lot of fun listening to Justin tonight. And with that, Dr. Rhinehart, the screen is yours.
All right. Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this evening. And like Les had mentioned, I've spent a lot of time there in Kentucky. I guess by the time I got done, Les, I was 2.5 years in, and had bred and ultrasounded and palpated a lot of cows in that time. And I really appreciate the time I got to spend there all across the state of Kentucky. And my time there at the University of Kentucky was extremely productive for me. And in fact, it's what made me want to be an extension specialist. And kind of a little story on Les before we get started here. Whenever I kind of decided that I wanted to be a beef cattle reproductive management extension specialist, and I knew that it was pretty small, kind of a market for those, and just a handful of us across the country these days. And Les said, well, there's always a job for the best. You just have to be the best. So I tried my best to be that, and appreciate the kind words on that, Les, in introduction there. And honestly, just I think having learned from some of the best in the country, and to be able to work around some of the best in the country now is kind of what keeps me up to date with some of the things we'll talk about this evening, and hopefully get some new information to you, and probably leverage into some information you've heard Les talk about before too across your state. And I'll give my spin on it and kind of my take, and then we'll have some time for discussion there at the end. And I really want to start with a really different kind of a take on this, and this is something I don't normally do, but I've done this just in a couple of different places, and start out really with just some philosophy almost. And let me see if I can get my pointer up here. Start out really with kind of some philosophy, and look at this from a little different angle. And the reason I want to do it this way, and the reason I'm calling this the long game, is, and just thinking about this more impact in the future, and how the decisions we make now kind of to stack up into either giving us an opportunity to make easier or better decisions in the future, or how those decisions we've made in the past can stack up against us to make our decisions tougher in the future. And the reason I want to think about it in that way, well, really a couple of different reasons. One is I noticed that as we talk about applied reproductive management technologies, anything from synchronization and AI to embryo transfer, those kinds of things, we always talk about them just in that year. And we talk about, the pregnancy rate that we got to our timed AI, or, the heat response we got that year, and the calving rate even for that year. And that's good. Those are measurements we need to take and think about. But if we always just think about it within that year, I think we're doing ourselves a disservice. We need to think about it 5, 10, 20 years and the next generation out. There's a lot of talk these days about sustainability, and to me, a big part, maybe the biggest part of sustainability, as I would define it, is being able to pass your production, your herd from your generation to the next, and give them the opportunity even to pass that on to the next one. And so when we think about it in that way, the decisions we make in reproductive management, I really think we should think about them not just in that year, but again, what it does years in the future. So one of the things that got me really looking at this in a different way are a couple of books that I kind of got onto. This has been a couple of years ago now. One is this Infinite Game. This Simon Sinek is the author. He's a leadership speaker, and somebody had kind of heard on YouTube as I was scrolling around through that, and ended up listening to this book as I was spending some time in the truck driving across our state and going to visit and with other producers. And it just really I guess helped me think more about this concept that had been rolling through my mind that I was calling the long game, and thinking about it as the infinite game. And he actually got a lot of his ideas for that from this other book, Finite and Infinite Games by James Carson. And James Carson is a pastor and an author, and kind of also a leadership speaker as well. So those two books don't have anything to do with cattle production specifically or per se, but they definitely, in the way I want to look at it tonight and think about it tonight, have a lot to do with it. So really these ideas, and here's another reference here for you, Leaders Eat Last, and another Simon Sinek book that leverages some of these ideas. But these ideas come from in economics. There's a discipline within that called game theory, and it applies to a lot of other things besides economics, but it's basically a way to look at decision making, and they call these finite versus infinite games. It seems really simple when you look at it, just those two words. We know what finite is, a limited amount of time or resource, infinite, an unlimited amount of time or resource. But it means very different things when you apply that to economics, if you think about it as managing a scarce resource. So scarcity being a limited amount, but the way you think about it and apply these principles can lead us down different decision-making paths. So real quickly, let's just talk about what this discipline of game theory, how they define finite versus an infinite game. So a finite game is going to have a known set of players, and you can just think in general of a finite game as being, an athletic event, something like football, and that there's a known set of players. Now you'll have substitutions in and out of the game, but when you start that game, there's a defined set of players on either side of the field, and they're not going to be putting more or taking players out during the game. Other than just the substitutions on the field, you start with the players you have, and that's usually where you're going to end up too. Certainly a set time frame. They're going to blow the whistle, and at the end of the game, then they're going to blow the whistle again, and that's it. That's the two ends of the game, and when it starts and when it finishes. Very stable rules. These rules will change from year to year. If you're thinking about this again like an athletic event, but within that year, certainly within a game, those rules are going to stay stable. You don't have to adjust to a different set of rules. And probably the bigger thing for us is we talk about agriculture production in general, food production in general, and specifically beef cattle production. This definition really stood out to me in that light. So value is spent. So in a finite game where you're playing just to win that game, you're spending value that was created at some other time, likely in some other place. And then again, at the end of it, there's a clear winner and a clear loser, and you're playing just to win that game. So, this would be like when I talk about the time day out pregnancy rate I got on a set of cows on a given day. That's a game I was, playing to try to be better than less, which, I do quite often. And we just, we play that game to win. Now, if we look at it on the other side of things, the infinite game, you have undefined players. You don't know who a player is going to be from 1 minute to the next. And you can think of this kind of like business. And it has an indefinite time frame. Nobody knows when you blew the whistle to start the game of business, right? We don't know when it's going to end. So it's an indefinite time frame. There's no start and end to it. The rules change constantly. They change within the time that you're trying to make a quick decision. The rules will change on you, and you have to be able to adapt to that. And then here again, this really impactful kind of a component of game theory, finite versus infinite game. Here, that value is created. You're constantly trying to create value. And because there's no end to this game, you don't even know when it really started. There's no clear winners. In any given time point, you might proclaim yourself a winner in an infinite game, but it's still going, and there might be a different winner in just a day or two from when you declare yourself the winner. So that there's no clear winners and no clear losers when you step back from it and look at it on a bigger scale. So here the game is not playing to win, but it's playing to stay in the game, and stay in the game as long as you want to or as long as you can. So again, some of these things that as we talk through it here for just a minute, it might seem really obvious or kind of common sense to you, but as we apply this to talking about reproductive management in beef cattle production, hopefully that shines a little bit different light on the decisions that we make. So here's really the crux of what I want to get to, and one of the I guess not so obvious things as you look at other people, and maybe as we think about ourselves and the way we make decisions, and maybe the way you manage your herd. So if you're out of balance, it's going to create issues, right? If you're a infinite player in a finite game, let's say I go into a football game and I'm playing just to get better for next year or something. We know that happens sometimes, but we also know that if we're doing that, then there's not a very high likelihood that we're going to win that game, right? So it's an unbalanced situation when you have an infinite player in a finite game. And the reverse of that is also true when you have a finite player in an infinite game. If I'm just playing to win today, but this game is going to go on indefinitely, then I'm going to be kind of left out in the cold in another day or two from now, or whatever the time scale is that we're working on. So that's where really the imbalance and the issues come in, and that's where I think maybe we see a lot of frustration in beef cattle production is having this imbalance of us thinking that we're in a finite game. We're playing like we're a finite player, but we're actually likely in an infinite game. And when we get those balanced, whether it's a finite game within an infinite game, or just thinking of it again as this bigger scale, I think that's really where the enjoyment, the flourishing comes in to beef cattle production. Is when we know the game that we're playing, and we play it as such, and we have that balance. So if we need to know what game we're playing, then it stands to reason that we'd ask a few questions about, is cattle production, is beef cattle production a finite or an infinite game? So if we think about those definitions that we went through just a second ago, do the players stay the same? No. I mean, cattle buyers, it may seem like you've been dealing with the same buyers of your calves for years and years, but if you kind of dig through the layers, there's probably some folks coming in and out of that game on the marketing side. If you think about it from a generational kind of standpoint, family members and partners come in and out of what we're doing. Beef consumers want different things, so that may go under the rules, but there's different types of beef consumers that come in, import or export markets come in and out. So there's always different players. There's different competition from protein competitors, or competitors for market share in the protein game, if we want to stay with that terminology. Most recent would be the fake meats or lab meats, plant-based meats, that kind of stuff. It's not the same players all the time. Who we were playing against as beef cattle producers 20 years ago, certainly a different set of players right now. So in that regard, definitely an infinite game. Is there a set time when the game's over? I don't think so, right? There's probably not many of us on the meeting here tonight that would say we know exactly, or that you know exactly when you're going to stop being a cattle producer, or cattle raiser, rancher, farmer, whatever term you put to it. Most of us don't have that in mind when that exact end is going to be. are the rules always the same? The factors that determine the value of your feeder calves that you're going to sell, or your cull cat or non-fed cattle, whatever the case is, those rules are always changing, and a lot of that comes with those different players coming in and out of the game. Is there a clear winner or loser? And I know sometimes it feels like there's always a clear winner that's not us. Sometimes we feel like we get beat up a lot, but we can think back to some years where we felt like we were winning that game. So there's not always a clear winner or loser, mostly because there's not an end to it. That we're just trying to stay in this game. And again, here coming back to the concept within this game theory discipline that really sticks out to me in everything, really, but in beef cattle production specifically, and even within reproductive management, is value created or spent. It's difficult to answer that because it's difficult to measure it all the time. But, again, if we kind of come back to this idea, the word that's thrown around a lot now of sustainability, that would indicate that you're at least not spending value, and it should indicate to us that we're trying to create value. And if we kind of go back to the old adage that what we're doing in beef cattle production is turning sunshine into meat, and just using cattle to harvest that sunshine through the forages that we graze or feed, then that's the value that's created in beef cattle production. We're taking energy from one place, putting it into a different place that creates a value in that transfer to somebody else, and the value here being a good high density, high quality protein for diets, and now so much that we have that we can support large export markets. So all those together would indicate that beef cattle production is a infinite game, and again, going back to that concept of being balanced in this game theory idea of being an infinite player in an infinite game. If I've done a good job of convincing that it is an infinite game, then what's that mean for managing reproduction? And the term that I'd used, for a while in my mind before I kind of got onto this game theory stuff, the playing the long game, year over year. What does all this mean for playing the long game in beef cattle reproductive management? And to me, it comes down to, I'll say this. I try to boil all these things down to something simple that I can get my mind around and key in on one factor that we need to manage. Personally, I think that I'll say this, and especially since I see that Jeff's on here, I think reproduction is the most important thing to focus on in beef cattle production, right? And Les would probably give me an amen on that. Of course, Katie and Jeff would say you got to feed them to breed them, and certainly nutrition could be, you could make the case that it's the most important. But for here, if we say that like any other food commodity, you have to make enough to eat some of it and to make some more of it. So everything that is food comes down to reproduction. Whether it's genetic selection there or whatever the case is, we have to consider all that in a balance with making more of it and making enough more of it to we can eat some of that, and we can use some to reproduce that, make more copies again. So if we think the reproduction is the most important, and we kind of try to keep focusing in on these focus points that we need to manage really intently, then I think within reproduction, the postpartum anestrus, the length of time it takes from when a cow has a calf until she's fertile again, until she can get bred back, and what we're trying to do is manage that so that postpartum anestrus is short enough that we can get her to have a calf every year, and hopefully about the same time every year. And if we need to catch them up, then it might be even a shorter period of time. So this postpartum anestrus, I think, is within reproductive management one of the most important things that we can focus on. There's so many things that that impact that length of time from when she has a calf until she's ready to breed again, that it's not as easy to manage as it is to pinpoint. So those are the things that we have to focus in on. And I'm going to try something a little bit here. And since we've got our chat open, let me open the chat. And just real quick, let me ask you, and I've kind of telegraphed my answer here a little bit, but everybody get ready to type in the chat. And I just kind of want to see what y'all think. If you had to say, what's the most important management practice that you can do in beef cattle production, what do you think that would be? So not necessarily what I just said of what's the most important component of beef cattle management, but my question to you is, what's the most important management practice, single management practice concept that we need to focus on for beef cattle production? Let's see if we can get some stuff coming up in the chat here. Maybe not. Culling, that's a good one. Nutrition. And I do this, I ask this question a lot whenever I'm talking to producers here in Tennessee. Y'all keep typing in percent wean per cow exposed. I like that. Pounds of calf wean per cow is the way we talk about it a lot. So definitely reproduction has a huge impact on that. Genetics, body condition. See, all these are great answers, and it's answers I get to this question all the time. And I kind of figured out too that I haven't ever asked the question just perfectly, because I haven't had many people. Calving schedule, there it is. Dale, it looks like you win. Less pregnancy diagnosis. We're getting right in there now. Herd health is extremely important. And the reason I'm dragging this out to see what you guys answer is because I think all those are definitely could be right at the top, tied for the most important thing we can, or the most important management practice we can focus on. But I think there's one thing that, and I kind of already said that Dale's the winner here, but there's one thing we can focus in on that makes all those management practices easier to do, right? And that's having a defined calving season. And so if we have a defined calving season, I draw the analogy to crop production a lot. So, if we're going to go out and plant, I grew up raising tobacco, so we could use that analogy. If I'm going to plant a crop of tobacco, I'm not going to take the setter, for a couple of passes in a tobacco patch and then go park it for a week, come back and plant a couple more rows, park it for 2 weeks, come back and plant a few more rows. There's just no food production, no crop production that we do staggered like that. Now there's some niches within what we do, sweet corn or roasting ears as we called it growing up. Maybe freezer beef, you need some staggered, some calves staggered out over time to have one finished when you need it. But most of the time with commodity food production and crop production, we need to have everything within a very short window of time. So that, for back to my tobacco analogy, if I need to fertilize, I can fertilize. I can pinpoint the exact right time to do that when I need that growth in those plants. When I go through to top or sucker, you used to have sucker before you spray for them, but you cut, all that stuff. If I have that crop at the very same, all those plants, all those rows, that entire crop at the same place in its production profile or its production calendar at any given time, that I can do all those things at once. So it's the same with a calf crop. If let's say health, that was one of the answers, a good health program. If I have a cow that has a 7-month-old calf on it in the same pasture with a cow that has a newborn calf, there's nothing I can do health management wise that I can do to everything in that pasture at the same time. So I'm much less likely to do that. Nutrition, body condition score, some of those answers that related to nutrition there. Again, if I've got a cow in a pasture that's in peak lactation in the same pasture with a dry cow, I'm either feeding one of them too little. If it's a cow in peak lactation, she's going to get thin. She won't breed back. or, if she's already bred back, she'll calve thin, those kinds of things. If I'm feeding to what the peak lactation cow needs, then I'm wasting money on the dry cow. So you kind of you get what I'm going for here. Marketing, same deal. Kind of the analogy with harvesting a crop, with cutting tobacco, whatever analogy you want to go with. So I do really think that within reproduction, if that's one of the most important things we can focus on, a defined calving season is the most important thing that we can do, because it's the gateway to doing everything else correctly. If it's genetic selection, we can apply that to, we can through reproductive technologies or bull selection, because I'm making more money to pay for a good bull, those kinds of things. All those are enabled to be done more precisely by having a defined calving season. It may be that if you've got multiple herds, that you're having different calving seasons at different times of the year, and that's certainly a legitimate way to do it. But within that set of cows, to make a crop of calves from them being as defined as you can is going to be the most important thing. So again, back to where I started with that discussion, kind of a long squirrel to chase there, but postpartum anestrus is the thing that we really need to focus in on, and all these things we have up here on the screen affect that. So let me close the chat here and kind of get back to my slides. So just a few more words on that, on some of the key factors that do influence reproduction. And I was kind of joking with Kate and Jeff there a minute ago, talking about nutrition, but it probably one of the most important things as it relates to that postpartum anestrus. Here, just a review and looking at how body condition score down here on the x-axis, as it goes up, then it increases the percent cycling whenever you go to start the next breeding season. Data that you've seen before, but just reinforces the fact that that nutrition is extremely important to managing that postpartum anestrus, and also it's extremely important to economic success, to profitability, because if 70% or maybe more of the cost of running a cow every year is tied up in nutrition, then this all comes back full circle. That if I have all my cows in the same production point at any given time, then I can manage my nutrition more precisely and be able to not spend as much or waste as much, whatever the case is, on keeping that right body condition score to keep a shorter postpartum anestrus. Here's I got to say that I stole this slide from Les, but I prettied it up a little bit. But again, if you think about energy partitioning, if you think about this cow as a water tank, and you have to pump in this water, and here we're thinking of the water being nutrients, whether it's energy or protein. They have to meet these certain requirements just to keep the organs going, keep the lights on, really, keep the heart pumping, the lungs working, and everything else going right. Once you get past that, then you can add either growth or add body condition score. And then one of the very last things that they'll add, if they're not already pregnant, one of the very last things that they'll do is start partitioning that energy into resumption of estrus cycles of this postpartum cow. So again, just the emphasis on how important nutrition is to shortening that postpartum interval as much as we can, and giving those cows every opportunity we can to breed, as early as they can in that calving season. Influence of days since last calving. So here, I'm just talking about how far postpartum these cows are. That'd be on the x-axis down here. So as the number of days since she had that last calf increases, then again the percent cycling at that time at the start of the calving season is going to be higher. And so what that tells us is it kind of goes back to reinforce the idea of having a defined calving season, and as defined as you can possibly get it. Sometimes I joke and say, I wish I could have every calf that we're going to have in a herd born on the very first day of the calving season. And in reality, that'd be pretty difficult to manage, right? But from this idea having as long as we can for every cow from the time she has that calf until we need to breed her again, to have another calf at about the same time next year, which is really, given the gestation length only 80 or 85 days. If I had them all born at that very first day, then that would give me the longest postpartum interval possible. So if we can put all this together with time since last calving or longer postpartum interval and the body condition score, then we're going to get to that point where we can have a higher weaning and weaning rate. And I think one of the answers in the chat to the question I'd asked earlier, one of the most important things, pounds of calf wean per cow, certainly that is the one that's going to move the needle most on that is going to be weaning rate. And the thing that's going to move the needle most on weaning rate is going to be the conception rate, which is influenced here, is kind of keep backing up into this, influenced by postpartum interval. So even, I also want to stress here, and a little bit different take on it, that even let's say I've gotten down to a 90-day breeding season, certainly that's something that most everybody can get to. I'd encourage you to think about getting to a 60 and really even make your ultimate target a 45-day breeding season and still get a 90+% calving or weaning rate to that. I think those are attainable goals without spending too much on them. But even within, let's say, a 90-day breeding season, it really matters as it relates to postpartum interval, the distribution of how those calves come within or how those calves breed within that 90-day breeding season. So here are just 3 examples of how we can get to the same pregnancy rate to 3 cycles or to a 90-day season, if you want to think about it like that, or 60 days if you want to think about it on the just straight 21-day ester cycles. But here I'm just kind of thinking about 3 months. Let's say that you get to that 90% pregnancy rate, just kind of steady. You're clipping along, getting about the same number bred each cycle, or the same percentage bred each cycle. Here an example 2. Let's say we had a year where it was kind of a drought going into the last calving season. Cows were a little thin. Maybe it was some decisions that we made because we were playing a finite game within an infinite game, and we were trying to save some money on our nutrition costs, and we didn't keep those cows in good enough condition. And that first cycle only get 10% of the cows bred, but I kind of had them getting where they needed to be and close there, and I still get to that 90%, but ended up getting most of them toward the end of that breeding season. And here, the kind of the front load that we're really going for, where we get most of them, or as many as physically possible, bred in that first cycle, and then we just pick up a few of the later ones in the next couple of cycles and still get to that 90%. If you look at what those 3 scenarios do to average days postpartum, it has a big impact on that. So we're talking about, at least 10 days different, 10, 11 days different, which really, in the grand scheme of things doesn't seem like much. But if you go out here to this example 2 versus example 3, now you're talking about 20, getting close to 20 days different, 20 plus. And that makes a huge impact on that next breeding season. So now we're getting back to this idea of playing a long game and not just thinking about that year in those decisions that we're making to get cows bred in that one breeding season, but how that affects the next breeding season. Because, if I end up here in this example 2 with 60% of them bred in the third cycle, I still get to that 90%, but now, most of my cows are less than 30 days postpartum when I go to start the next breeding season, and it's going to be quite a bit worse than this. I'm going to have some of those cows that fall out if I'm really staying true to my selection criteria of not keeping open cows. So here, some of you have probably seen this. This is a slide that I just blatantly stole from Les, and I think Les might have modified this from another fellow that we worked with and that he went to school with. But this gets down into a little bit more of the endocrinology, the physiology of what we're actually trying to manage, what those things that we just talked about influence in that resumption to estrus cycles after they've had that last calf. So if if everything goes well in calving, if it's not a difficult dystocia, and everything goes right, there's no retained placenta, don't have a pyometria, don't have a uterine infection, then that uterus is really just a resilient tissue. It's going to go back to where it needs to be and repair itself within a couple of weeks. But the thing that keeps those cows from being fertile for a longer period of time is the interaction of their environment with, and I'll say this kind of unscientifically, but with their brain and giving them cues of whether or not they're ready to support another pregnancy and another lactation. And specifically, the way that shows up is if you think, I'm sure a lot of you have heard Les talk about the ovaries and follicles and CLs, and follicles producing estrogen, CLs producing progesterone. And if you think about after that couple of weeks of uterine involution and the ovaries start back to growing follicles, the estrogen that's produced by those follicles actually, until the environment changes the hypothalamus, specifically the little area there to the base of the cow's brain, until that environmental cues tell it to do differently, then that estrogen is actually having a negative effect on reproductive cyclicity. It's saying, no, we're not ready yet. We know you're trying ovaries, you're trying to get this cow pregnant again, but we want you to hold off until we've given her enough time that we know that she's going to have enough nutrition to support another pregnancy and another lactation just right after this other lactation that she just started. Well, eventually, the environment gives her those cues to transition out of that negative feedback of that estrogen. And the really important thing here is how that happens. So again, if we get the body condition score right, we've managed health correctly, and all that environment says, it tells that cow's hypothalamus tells her to, okay, you're ready to get pregnant again. What's that actually look like? And what it looks like is she'll ovulate, but she doesn't show estrus to that, and that's kind of what this is depicting. So she'll ovulate, and she'll produce, or she'll have a CL that produces some progesterone. The timing's just not set up right, and so she'll have a short cycle. That ovulation there is actually not accompanied by an estrus, a standing heat, so it's a silent heat. But she does make a little progesterone, and that little bit of progesterone in that shorter period of time that she makes that progesterone in that short cycle is extremely important for setting up the thermostat, or the feedback mechanisms that lead to a normal estrus cycle. And we need to get to that normal estrus cycle before she can get pregnant again. So that's that transition from the environment saying, just hold off, you're not ready to have another pregnancy yet. And then saying, okay, well, you're about ready. Let's get everything geared up. Let's get the thermostat back to where it's working right, and controlling all the hormones and when she's in heat and when she's ovulating correctly. And let's get all that worked out. So after they finally get that done, and again, this big component of that being that short exposure to that hormone progesterone produced by the CL, then she gets that normal estrus cycle. And this first estrus, she has an opportunity to get pregnant if we started the breeding season, put the bulls back in. It's not ideal, but that next one that she'll have after this normal cycle is getting close to where we can expect a normal pregnancy rate to that single service, or if we're doing time to AI, normal time to AI pregnancy rate. So if we can back all this up on our days here on the x-axis to where all that's happening well before we want to start the next breeding season, that's really what we're going for. And again, just kind of keep on folding into this idea that it's not just what we do in that year that impacts all the timing of all this, whether it happens out here like we've got on the graph, or whether it starts out here sooner or back here sooner. It's not just what we do in that year that dictates when that is. It's what we've done the year before, and even the year before that, and all those things that snowball into what we're managing at that given time that we're making those decisions. So this is just a different way to graph it out on the days, and a little bit different time scale than what we just looked at, trying to start this a little bit earlier. So if we can have that short cycle, and the blue line here mapping out the progesterone, if we took a sample of our blood and measured the progesterone in any given time, that's what this blue line is signifying. And so if we back it up and we want to have this short cycle occur just a few weeks after she had that previous calf, then we can manage her just perfectly to get that to happen. But odds are there will be several cows in our herd that we can't manage to get that done, or maybe they have a bout with a respiratory disease, or for whatever reason they've got a little deficient on their mineral. If we tried to save a little bit on our mineral costs, whatever the case is, and we may need to help them. And so the traditional ways we've done that in the past kind of really started out doing it with injection of GnRH. That's things, trade names like Cistril, Factoril, Fertigil, those kinds of things that we could go in there and give an injection of that and try to, if they had a follicle that would respond to it and ovulate, we just speed things up and then they'd have that short exposure to progesterone. But that's not as effective and as I guess across the board effective as some of the other options that we have now. And actually applying that progesterone either through CEDAR, controlled intravaginal drug release device. Most of you probably familiar with those, vaginal insert that delivers progesterone directly through the mucosal membranes of the vagina, or through a feed additive melangestrol acetate. So we have these opportunities, these pharmaceuticals, that if a cow is close to having this happen, but just hadn't quite kicked that off herself to have that short cycle, then we can apply these to move it up a little bit, especially in years when we may have been struggling with some environmental things that we couldn't control, or some economic things that we couldn't control that led us to the cows would have naturally had a delayed or a longer postpartum interval if we didn't intervene there. So we have those opportunities. One of the biggest opportunities we have to do that is to apply an ester synchronization protocol that involves either GnRH or a progesterone of some sort, either through the CEDAR or the MGA. Hopefully a lot of you that are on the meeting tonight are already doing some synchronization and AI with that, or synchronization for natural service, because I know Les has worked on that quite a bit with you in Kentucky, and we've tried to follow that lead here in Tennessee. But the reason I show these protocol sheets is not to talk about protocols, unless you want to here in a few minutes in the Q&A, but it's to say that if you look at these protocol sheets that are put together by folks that do what Les and I do across the country, you see that this is involved into nearly every one of them involving some sort of progestogen, some sort of progesterone. And for a long time, we talked about synchronization protocols and for timed AI being just that, just a tool for being able to use artificial insemination because of the power that gives us in genetic selection. And I think Les might agree with this. Anymore, I think about synchronization protocols are at least as important component of those, if not maybe more important, is the fact that we apply this progesterone. And if you look at most of these protocols where they're a 7-day interval, that looks quite a bit like that short cycle that we just looked at, that a cow naturally goes through when she has that short, low concentration exposure to progesterone through her natural endocrinology. We can mimic that with these protocols of applying progesterone as part of that. And so much so, of course, this is data from what Les has put together there in Kentucky, and we've added some to it in Tennessee, but synchronization for natural service, MGA or CEDAR for 7 days and turn the bulls in, and no injections on that. We don't want them too tight, but again, Les did, and Ben, I think, was a part of this as well. But showing where you can go in and any control experiments where you keep the bull to cow ratio similar to what you might already have it, move cows from having 10% more overall pregnancy rate, but going back to those concepts we've already kind of laid out, it's not just the overall pregnancy rate, but it's the calving distribution within that season, that you move them from just about half of them calving in the first 30 days to 80% of them calving in the first 30 days. And those little examples that we looked at a few slides ago, we only shifted it up to, I think, 60% in that one example. If you're talking about shifting 80% of your calves in the first cycle of calving, or the first 30 days of calving, that's huge to the average days postpartum overall of that group. And if you think about this from a long game perspective, or playing that, being an infinite player in an infinite game, if you do that year over year, breeding cows becomes as easy as setting tobacco or planting corn. It's just something you do, and it's not always difficult, and it's not always a worry, but it takes years and years, or not years and years, but it takes a few years of stacking this up and playing that long game, and sometimes it takes making decisions that seem counterintuitive in a given year to be able to get to that the next year or the year after that. And again, just thinking about this long term more so than just 1 year, trying to get the very best numbers on paper that we can. In the way that that would look here, some data, putting several studies together, talking about fixed time AI pregnancy rates in anestrus cows versus cows that are already cycling, and talking about how these technologies help us out some, give us an extra advantage in catching these cows up or getting some pregnant that we wouldn't otherwise. Just showing that when we do fixed time AI through with estrus synchronization, we'll get cows pregnant that weren't going to show heat. And so if we do that, then we're that next year, then we've shifted that average days postpartum further along for when we start that next breeding season, when we start the estrus sync protocol for starting that next breeding season. Really what I want to build this into is not just the idea of just shifting that days postpartum, but it's kind of going back to what something I mentioned just a minute ago, making some what seem like counterintuitive decisions. And I know, Les and I have talked about this a lot, and I've heard him say it too. And I just want to basically, I've taken 50 minutes here to lead into the concept of saying that you might read something in popular press, or hear somebody that does a job like what I do say, you don't need to do estrus syncing AI on a cow until she's at least 45 days postpartum, or she's, some will say 30 days postpartum. And I don't mean to put words in Les' mouth. He can jump in here on the discussion too, but I would say, and I think he would too, that if a cow is healthy, she had a good calving even 2 weeks ago, and there's nothing wrong with her. The calving went fine, and she doesn't have a uterine infection or a taint placenta or anything. Even if she's not 30 days along or 45 days postpartum, go ahead and try her out. Put the cedar in her, do the sync protocol. Unless you're putting $200 straw semen in her, give it a shot. But do it knowing full well that those cows that are shorter anestrus, you might only get a 20% pregnancy rate to those. But even if you get 20%, that comes pretty close to paying for doing it. And if you apply that synchronization protocol specifically with the progesterone in it, then even if she doesn't calve or she doesn't settle to that timed AI, she on average from less data, she'll be 30 days earlier calving to the bull next year. So now when you go to do the same thing the next year, you have more of them that are farther along postpartum. And again, that's all this kind of thinking about this, not just in that year. And a lot of those numbers are given to you, the voluntary waiting periods and all that before starting a sync protocol are developed around a targeted number for that timed AI pregnancy rate. But if you think about it, not just about that number at that given time or that given year, but you think about what that decision does to how many you might get settled at the time they either next year or 10 years from now when your grandkids are doing it, then that's really, to me, more important than just making it look good on paper this year. So it can lead to some counterintuitive ideas within if you have a finite mindset, but if you're an infinite player in this infinite game, it makes perfect sense to me to do some things different than what you might read in popular press or maybe what you hear at some meetings or those kinds of things. So that hopefully is kind of puts those two together. Also gives some justification to why I might tell you to do something a little bit different if you ask my opinion on it than you might hear from other folks. But I'm not doing, I don't give consultation to folks on their breeding season based on making me look good to get a high pregnancy rate that year. But I'm thinking about what it does for the next year and the year after that. Maybe to give a specific example here, when I started working for University of Tennessee, actually April Fool's Day was my 11-year anniversary. You still don't know who the joke is on yet, me or UT. But so when I first got here and started working with our research stations on doing their applied reproductive technologies, our plateau research station, that's our biggest herd. It's got about 400 cows in it. Be breeding there tomorrow and the next day to get those cows bred. They were taking anything that wasn't at least 45 days postpartum before they even started the sync protocols and just sorting them off into a single group, 30, 40 cows, and putting a couple of bulls with them. Didn't even do the sync protocol on them. So we talked through all this and we said, let's try it. I'll cover the sync cost and I'll get some semen for you. You won't have to pay for all that stuff. Let's try it for a couple of years of any of those that are at least a couple of weeks from calving. Let's try it out. And what we saw over time, just like we would expect to see now, is that those cows would move up and get more of them saved in instead of continually just losing them out of the end of the breeding season year over year. So hopefully that's a more tangible example of making these counterintuitive decisions within a finite game that make more sense in an infinite game. So again, just to wrap this up, and I've already gotten close to using up almost all my time here just talking at you, but a few last words here. If you're thinking about the long game mindset, playing an infinite game of beef cattle production, put the effort into developing a calving season if you don't have one. And if you do have one, put the effort into making it as short as possible and still get at that 90+% weaning rate. Think about the cost of marketing or replacing open cows with a long game or an infinite game mindset. I'm pretty, I don't have much mercy on a cow that doesn't breed in whatever season I've defined for her. And so I was pre-checking at our Ames Plantation herd, which is Southwest Tennessee, earlier today. And I've seen them cull Pathfinder cows that didn't breed in their 45-day breeding season. And the fact that they've done that for a lot of years now, they can calve a 92% weaning rate, or they can wean a 92% weaning rate to a 45-day calving season year over year over year. So that's what it takes is selection. We talk about genetics or reproduction not being highly heritable, but you can still move the needle through selection. And whenever geneticists would talk about that, that's talking about individual traits within reproduction. But on the whole, if you cull cows that don't fit your environment, that don't do what you ask them to do in your environment, then eventually you'll get to the type of cow that does fit your environment and do what you ask them to do. The effort and cost, I've already covered that on reproductive technologies, especially those that would relate to synchronization with progestogen to give them a little advantage. You don't want to mask your selection criteria and heavy selection pressure on reproduction, but sometimes we need to give those late calvers a little boost with synchronization that includes a progestogen. just think about how all that comes together in the infinite mindset. So again, know the game you're playing, an infinite player in an infinite game. Hopefully it's what we've set up if we think about it from that discipline of game theory. Take a look at that big picture, ask big questions. Don't be scared to make a counterintuitive choice within a given year, because if you do it for a few years, chances are you'll end up looking like you are winning those finite games within the every year you can say, I've got a 45-day breeding season. I got a 95% pregnancy rate within that 45 days. That's how you get there, is by making the tough, sometimes counterintuitive decisions. And if you only take one thing away from everything I've said tonight, just remember, cull open cows. Simple as that, right, Les? That's the key to reproductive management. And Dr. Bullock can tell you that that's the key to genetic selection for reproduction. Just cull open cows. You'll figure out how big they need to be, and you'll figure out how much milk they need to give, and you'll figure out which ones fit your environment. So
I think people would be surprised if they got rid of all their bad cows, how much better their herd is.
Yep. So I'll go ahead and stop it there and open it up for discussion, and apologize for taking most of the time just talking at you, but I'm game to stay and answer questions or have discussion as long as you guys would like.
Remember to type any questions you have in the chat box. I had one come in to me personally, Justin. I'll just start off with. The question was, it really starts off with a statement. It says, I don't have a bullpen. How can I have a controlled calving season without a bullpen?
Yeah. And that's always the toughest thing, right? Anytime we talk about this, it's always about, what do I do with the bulls? And there's so many ways that you can think about that. Probably my favorite is, if you have enough cows to justify it, you can run 2 herds of cows, and you can run a fall calving herd and a spring calving herd. That cow doesn't have to be out. Let's say you're going for a 60-day breeding season. It doesn't have to be out on the afternoon of day 60, right? It can be in there quite a bit longer. Matter of fact, I talked about Ames Plantation, and man's a, come on, man, that's rude. That is rude. So we throwing me off my game now. I can't even play short game now. It's a long game.
Yeah, focus on your long game with that picture up, big boy.
It's been a long time that I've been seeing stuff like that as a Tennessee fan. I'm going to come back to talking about these bulls, but I got to tell y'all, I did my undergraduate work at the University of Tennessee, and I was there from 95 to 99. And so if you know anything about football, and if y'all are Kentucky football fans, you'll remember those as not the happiest times playing your rival to the south. But we were pretty good in that time, right? And I was there when we won the national championship game that many years ago. But for a long time now, I've been realizing how spoiled I was, and Les doesn't let me forget it very often when we get to talk about it. So I appreciate that. Back on the bulls now. So I was going to say, if you've got enough cows to justify it, and you can run a fall and a calving herd, fall and a spring calving herd, you can, let's say you're starting on April Fool's Day for your spring breeding season. You put that rascal in there, and you're not starting your fall breeding season until the day after Thanksgiving. Honestly, that as long as that bull stays in good condition, you can leave him with those spring calvers until you put him with the fall calvers. Load him up in the trailer, take him by a veterinarian, get a breeding soundness exam done on him, make sure he's still good. And again, this is assuming you keep him in good condition. He's got enough to eat while he's out there just hanging out with those cows. If we did all this stuff to manage to front load our breeding season, get those cows pregnant early, he's done all his work, and he's just out there loafing and staying in good condition. And then you can clean it up on the pre-check side of things. And so that's, within, I answered that question earlier, is the most important management practice you can do is have a defined calving season. If you think about it, really the way I asked the question, the actual answer to that is to pre-check cows. So if hopefully most of you are pre-checking cows, if you're not, I'd really encourage you to do that every year. And maybe you'd even want to do it a couple of times, but at least doing it when you're weaning cows. you can clean that up after you've been there and to tell you, when they're due to calve. And if they're not due to calve within that calving window you want, then they get to find a job somewhere else. And maybe it fits somebody else's thing. So kind of going back to a tangible example, and I mentioned Ames Plantation, that 45-day breeding season, they used to take those bulls out day 46. And I said, well, just leave them in there. You're just putting them in bullpens when you're done and they're not doing anything. Just leave them in there. I'll clean it up for you on the pre-check. Leave them in there 120 days. I don't care. They're just standing out there eating grass. And so they started doing that. And what they found is they got a lot more salvage value out of the cows that did conceive, but later, by just leaving the bulls out there and letting them do a little extra work. So, that running 2 calving seasons and getting more use out of your bull, putting him back and forth, that's my favorite way of avoiding the having to have a bullpen. The other thing, and I've heard Les talk about this, and if you can manage to do it, buy a bull, use him for whatever you want your breeding season to be, or maybe it's a little longer, but then selling to somebody else that has a different breeding season. And sometimes you can, if you look at the cost of that bull as cost per pregnancy, rather than just writing a check for this much, then that makes it make more sense. Even if I buy a $3,000 bull and I can't sell him for $3,000, if I sell him for $2,000 and I've got $1,000 in getting my 40 cows bred, that's not a bad cost per pregnancy, right?
Pretty cheap, actually.
Pretty real cheap. Yeah. And you got him out of the way. So there's plenty of ways to manage a defined calving season. It's going to involve pre-checking, but there's plenty of ways to do it without even needing a bullpen. So
I'm not an economist, but I think pregnant cows are more valuable than open cows nearly every day.
Yep.
Another question that came in, I got 2 more actually. The first one was from Larry. That put it on the group chat. What % of cows that are pregnant show estrus 30 to 60 days after AI?
That actually stay pregnant. If I'm getting my data right, it's going to be like maybe 5% that actually do that are staying pregnant. But what you'll see, especially in that window of time that you're talking about there, that 30 to 60 days, you might have called them pregnant at 30 days and they'll show estrus because they're in the process of losing that pregnancy or have lost that pregnancy. And you'll find that they don't calve when they're supposed to. So that may be part of the question, but it's a fairly low, a very low percentage that actually show heat while they're pregnant to a pregnancy that they're going to maintain to calving. But you'll have some that show heat after you pre-check at a day 30, that'll slip. And that's about a 12%. If it's something like frozen embryos, you might be higher at 15 or 18% loss rate within there. But just depending on how that question's asked, if you're talking about the ones that stay pregnant, it's really low percentage, but there's still some loss there, somewhere 10 to 15% loss from 30 to 60 days.
Another question just came in from, I believe, Alina Bergman. Is there a recommended economical test for blood pregnancy checks? It's not always easy to get the vet out to do checks when we are weaning.
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and glad you brought that point up. Yeah, there's plenty of opportunity for blood pregnancy tests. There's kits that you can buy, and actually got one there in Western Kentucky, and probably got several across Kentucky. We've got a lot more of them in a few labs that have sprung up across Tennessee, where you can take blood samples, ship it to the lab or the vet office that set up a lab in their office to do the blood pregnancy test. It's either going to be, there's basically 2 companies that are running them that'll be in these different labs. It's either IDEX or Bioprin, and those are very accurate pregnancy diagnostic tests if you use them correctly. For the IDEX, I think they have to be at least 60 days from the time they had their last calf, and within 28 days of when they're, or at least 28 days post-breeding for it to be accurate. And for the Bioprin, I think it's 80 days post-calving in 30 days post breeding for it to work well. And it'll tell you that, you know, they'll have a false positive rate of something like 5% or whatever, but really what that is they were pregnant when you pulled the blood sample, and they just lost the pregnancy if they didn't calve when they were supposed to that pregnancy test. And to me personally, I don't have any concern at all that I'm going to accidentally call a pregnant cow open with that blood pregnancy test if I used it correctly, if I was far enough out for, you know, by label of those diagnostic tests. I don't have that concern of accidentally selling a pregnant cow that it calls open, but you do have that false positive sometimes, but usually almost always that she was actually pregnant whenever you pull the blood sample. The way that works is it's measuring a hormone in the blood that's only produced by the placenta. And so if that hormone's in the blood, it means there's a placenta there, and she should be pregnant. If you do it too quick, postpartum, you know, if you're trying to move something up really quick, doing like what I talked about earlier, that Les has done a lot of, if you go in 2 weeks after you calve and do a synchronization for natural service and go in to check really quick after that, that hormone that it's measuring, it's a protein hormone that's really big as far as hormones go, and it takes a long time for it to clear, and so there can be some residual of that pregnancy specific protein from that last calving if you do it too quick. So, but yeah, and those labs are everywhere. I kind of started talking there, may not answer the question, but they're really easy to come by, and sure Les can give you some references for folks there in Kentucky that across the state that labs that do those tests. So.
UK will run the tests for you, and then also Sandy there at Dependable Livestock Testing will run the tests for you.
Yeah, we use Sandy quite a bit. You know, we have some other labs in Tennessee, but the Dependable Livestock Testing, it's not just an endorsement for them, but they've always given us really good customer service, so we use them quite a bit.
Yeah, honestly, we use them a whole lot too.
Hey Les, can I jump in real quick, because we've got a few folks jumping off, and I just need to let them know, for those of you that are new to this, the Cape code is up on that beautiful slide that I constructed tonight for Justin. Sorry about that, buddy.
Yeah, appreciate
that. The Cape code goes, if you talk to your county agent, you can get the form for the Cape Educational Program, and that code that we have there will go in the part for the speaker's signature. So just real quick on that. And while I'm on here and got you, Justin, I have a quick question for you.
Sure.
If you'll let me, Les, can I do it?
Yeah, no, it's hard to read on my screen. It's VOL Repro.
Yep, VOL Repro. Vol
Yeah.
Repro. Same as your password to get into the session tonight. Justin, I always struggle with this because I think one of the biggest shortcomings of our genetic evaluation and EPDs is not having a really good reproductive efficiency EPD. If you were in charge of that whole thing, what would you make an EPD for that would get to reproduction, do you think? Do you have an idea of what you would shoot for if you were controlling that?
Yeah, there's probably several different ways that I think about it, and think about that quite a bit, actually trying to find a better selection tool for reproduction. The first thing I do is for, you know, for seed stock registries, I would really encourage whole herd reporting, and to know when and why cows fall out. You know, if you're part of a breed registry that doesn't require whole herd reporting, and you might be buying bulls out of the cow herds that has a lot of cows fall out year after year, and they don't ever get reported for not getting bred to the breeding season, or suffering pregnancy loss, or any number of things. So if you don't know why they're falling out, and you're only reporting the ones that do get pregnant, there's no way to really get a stability or a rebreeding rate or anything like that, kind of a true estimate or a predictive algorithm for that. So that'd be the first thing I'd really heavily encourage is reporting everything, so really what you're comparing cows to, and even for buying bulls, it's still, it seems kind of old school, but one of the things I think about when buying bulls is asking about the cow that he came out of, when she calved every year, how old she is, and what her average calving interval is. So things like that. Really, if it came down to individual kind of EPDs, if we had an EPD for calving interval and stability, I think we could do a lot with those. But again, it would require whole reporting to do that.
Good answer. Thank you, sir.
You bet.
Dare, while you're on there, there's a question that involves genetics. I have seen over and over how an F1 cross cow has higher fertility. Does that also work for an F1 bull over a purebred bull? And would the F1 bull possibly shorten your calving window?
I always like to let you repro guys answer these genetic questions. That's you do get some increased reproductive capabilities from an F1 bull, but it is not anywhere close to what you get through the cow. So, and I don't think it's going to do anything about shortening basically the calving interval, or the calving window. What it's going to do is it's going to give a little bit more carrying capacity for that bull. He can cover a few more cows. He may have a little bit more vigor through the breeding season, but those a little bit more libido possibly. But those are probably the biggest benefits there. To my knowledge, and you guys jump in, I don't really think it's going to probably shorten the calving window for you.
Correct. Yeah, and that's the way I look at it. I guess it'd be the same across all species, but the male's job's not really that difficult. He's got one job to do for a little while. Once he's done, that's it. So since there's not much room for improvement on the male side, you just don't make that much improvement from an F1 cross. But like you're saying, it really shows up on the cow side. And I'm glad that question was asked, because it's still the number one thing that you can do in genetic selection, I think personally, to improve reproductive performance. And in the place we leave so much low hanging fruit in commercial beef production is to run a set of F1 cows.
Absolutely.
There's ways to keep that F1 from getting diluted out. Plenty of ways to go at that. And maybe you need an F1 bull to get, to manage heterosis in your herd. But that on the cow side, that's really the biggest place we can make some improvements on reproductive performance through genetic selection.
I tell you, just while I'm on here and going, I'm gonna keep going. And Les and I covered this a little bit in the one we did a few weeks ago. The big thing on that shortening the window that you can do with your bull is make sure you have adequate calving ease, because if your heifer or whatever has trouble calving, that's going to be a big reason for you to expand that window, because she's going to have a longer postpartum interval.
Yeah.
Now I'm done.
And you probably know this, but it's something I didn't learn until just a few years ago. But a lot of where that calving, and most of us know this, that where that calving ease comes from is a shortened gestation. So when we're really chasing hard on low birth weight genetics, what we're doing is on average shortening the gestation length of the pregnancy that bull sires. And when that was actually discovered, that you could make a genetic selection difference on calving ease on birth weight, they were actually trying, and this I think was a fella up in maybe Montana or Wyoming, but he was getting bulls out of Canada, some Charolais bulls out of Canada, and some of those line ones out of Fort Keogh, and was trying to find bulls that would sire shorter gestation pregnancies, so that he had more days postpartum. So it was more of a reproductive management type thing. He found those bulls, and at the time, what were breeds that had some issues with birth weight, and found that by doing that, he decreased birth weight. And so then all the focus went to birth weight genetic selection, and kind of forgot about the shortened gestation leads to longer postpartum interval. But that's really where all that started.
One last question, bull to cow ratio when using synchronization for natural service.
Yeah, and that's really important to stress again that we're not talking about a full ester synchronization protocol like you would have for timed AI. You know, you don't want to give all the injections. We're just talking about the 7-day exposure to progesterone, making sure that the bull is at least a 3-year-old bull and past the BSE. And I'm comfortable in saying that you don't need to change from what your normal bull to cow ratio would be. You know, we still talk about that rule of thumb of, you know, 1 cow or heifer per month of age of a bull up to 3 years old, and kind of stopping at 35 to 40. You know, if I have a 3-year-old bull that I know, you know, have used and know he has good libido, he's in good condition, passed breeding soundness exam, and as long as I'm not giving those injections to make that synchronization real tight, I'm comfortable with not changing the bull to cow ratio. You don't want to take an 18-month-old bull and put him with 30 of them that are synchronized in any way at all. You'll overwork him. So you need to pay attention to the details, but you can do it in a way that you still get the same serving capacity or the same number of calves out of that bull, or more actually in that case.
All
Makes
the
sense.
questions I see, there was one comment to the guy that Jeff had that, or no, it wasn't. Dale Hahn said that he and his neighbor share bulls. He breeds spring, I breed fall, and they don't have the fence to do it to hold the bulls. So that's a pretty good deal on your cost per pregnancies if you can find a neighbor that you can split those costs with.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of creative ways to get around that, and it's well worth it to find those ways once you get a good defined calving season.
One of the things, and I know you do it with your people too, but we challenge folks here is to don't think about it like your grandpa did. Think about it, in a way that's more dollars and cents. Figure out what your costs for pregnancies are, and then determine a way to overcome those costs and maintain no bull as long as possible.
Yep.
And we really don't think about that a lot, but we don't play that infinite game very often.
That's right. And there's market reasons for that. That's the same in Kentucky for a lot of our producers. In Tennessee, it's not the primary source of income, and unfortunately, it's kind of becomes a byproduct of land ownership. But in the aggregate, it's our ag's our number one industry in the state, and within that, beef cattle is the number one revenue generating commodity in agriculture in Tennessee. So it might not make a huge difference to individual folks' income if they're just paying taxes by doing it. But if we move the needle just a little bit and convince you, I'll try to make some money with your cows, then we do a lot for the state economy. So that's what we're here for. And just encourage you to think about it, not just the long game like we've been talking about, but in the bigger picture too. We're part of making food efficiently for a lot of folks.
I think we've worn them out. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate the phenomenal presentation, and thanks everybody for joining us. We'll see you in 2 weeks.